One moment I was about to kiss Grace, the next, she was wrenching herself off of me and off the bed. She stumbled to her feet, one hand clutching her head, the other, reaching for the bedpost for stability. I launched myself off the bed as her face turned a sickening shade of white, and I all but dove to catch her as her strength seemed to fail her. Her eyes fluttered as I lifted her into my arms before they closed completely. Grace? I begged her to open her eyes. Grace, I'm here, it's okay. Help! I bellowed. I need a doctor. Her lifeless body didn't even flinch when I yelled. Grace was scared of everything. I would have scared her if she was conscious. But she wasn't conscious. I had just gotten her. I couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after I had saved her. Several servants rushed in, and they looked around helplessly. I could hear someone mind-linking the doctor to hurry, but there was no time. Her breathing was shallow, coming out in just short little breaths. Grace! I cried as I raced down the 5 flights of stairs, and out the door, ignoring the stares of several people who were still up in the house. Grace, please. I just got you. You can't leave me. I burst through the hospital doors, and my brother looked up in surprise. Sawyer, I cried out, my voice breaking. Help. Sawyer wasted no time. He jumped right into action. He grabbed the door to an exam room, and I rushed through it. I laid her on the table as gently as I could. She hated laying on her back due to her injuries, but there was no other choice right now. Sawyer grabbed his stethoscope and immediately began his workup of her unresponsive body. I stayed as close as I could to her as he assessed the situation. Sawyer then grabbed a shot, and I held her hand as he injected it. I didn't get a chance to ask what it was for or what it would do before she woke up screaming. It was the most gut-wrenching sound in the whole world. I wanted to scream right along with H. She thrashed around, her hands gripping at her head so tightly, her knuckles were turning white. Sawyer? I called out, desperate for it to start. Sawyer's normally very controlled expression masked something of true horror before he grabbed something completely different. You need to hold her still for me, Reese. As still as you can so she doesn't hurt herself more. Why, what are you going to do? I asked, still trying to soothe her. I'll explain after. This is going to be very painful for her. She's already in pain. I shouted at him angrily. Do it, Reese, now. I hated that I followed his order. Hated that I held her down like that. The way the people who had all but destroyed her life probably had countless times. And my heart was going to beat out of my chest as she started to let out hoarse, broken-sounding screams, her body fighting against me blindly. Sawyer! I shouted angrily, but he didn't answer. He was focused on holding his hand as steady as he could as he injected her with some unknown substance. SHHHH. I tried to soothe, but my voice didn't sound real to me, and I knew it was falling on deaf ears, but I tried anyways. It will be over soon. It felt like a million years before Sawyer pulled the syringe from her side, and it was at least another minute before she started slowly stop fighting me. Her screams stopped, and she once again went limp. What did you do to her? I felt numb as I let her go. I hated how helpless she looked. How helpless I felt. We should take this to another room. Sawyer tried, looking uneasy. I gestured for him to lead the way. My wolf didn't want to leave her, but I knew she was fine if Sawyer was willing to walk away. He led the way to his office a few doors away, and he sat at his desk, and I plopped down into the chair on the side. What do you really know about her, Reese? Because from where I'm standing, you know nothing about her, he said after a long moment. My frown deepened. What did he mean by that? Of course, I barely knew her. I had only found her like 2 days ago, and she didn't speak. Not one word even in all of that. She didn't say one word. Your point? Is she like the others? Sawyer asks bluntly. No. I think she might be my true mate, but she's wolfless so I'll never know. I think this was a mate thing, Reese, but I haven't marked her yet. I answered dumbly. No, Sawyer said seriously. I mean, I think she has been marked by someone else, and this was their doing. Her mark isn't visible, but the amount of bruising and scars on her body makes it hard to see anything. You think she's mated to someone else? My stomach turned. The thought didn't sit well with me. Based on everything her exams have shown, I would guess it wasn't a consensual mark and mated situation. But this was almost definitely a side effect of a mark. I'm sorry. My hand fisted at my side and then punched the nearest wall in frustration. Everything felt like it was crashing around me. There was little to do but wait now till she woke up and could tell us whatever painful answers we needed. And we would go from there. But there was one thing for certain, whoever was responsible for her pain, for every mark on her innocent body, to whoever saw and didn't stop it, they would not get out of it alive. I was the Alpha King for a reason. I prided myself on being ruthless, and I was going to show them all just how ruthless I was, starting with her sister Kinsley, and her brother-in-law, Adrian. I woke up slowly. My brain didn't seem like it wanted to work right now. I could hear a steady beeping, but I couldn't make my eyes open. I took a steadying breath and tried not to panic. Had I been drugged? That didn't make a ton of sense since I was almost definitely in a comfy bed. I remembered I had been with the Alpha King, but it all felt fuzzy. I wondered if the Alpha King was still with me, and that was enough of a thought to force my eyes open. I scanned the room. It was white with white cabinets, and what looked like medical supplies everywhere. Crap. Was I in the hospital? My breath caught when I saw him. His dark brown hair looked as though he had worn a path through it by running his hand through it so many times. His eyes held shadows, and his expression was grim. I frowned, my panic growing a little. I had troubled him. I was the cause of that serious expression on his face. I grabbed his sleeve. I wanted to apologize for all the trouble I had caused, but I had no idea where to even start. I didn't know what had happened that had even caused me to be here. Reese looked at me for the first time since I had woken up, and removed my hand from his sleeve, looking irritated. "Don't touch me right now," the Alpha King snapped. I pulled back into myself. What did I do that made him so angry? That headache you had was a direct result of you having intimate relations with someone who didn't mark you. I looked at him in confusion. I didn't know that you couldn't kiss or be sexual without a mate. That didn't make sense for what was happening back in my old pack. And wouldn't that be something that the Alpha King knew? I mean, did he also get a headache like I did? How could you not have told me that you were marked by your mate when I was going on about how you would be my bride, and I was thinking that you might be my mate? I frowned in surprise. What was he talking about? Marked by mate? I didn't have a mate. Suddenly I was back in that dungeon cell that I had lived in for so long. I was feeling off that day and was laying in my cot. I was never truly given the day off, but after a lot of mistakes, Kathy, the head of servants, had taken pity on me and sent me to lay down for a while. I heard the door to the dungeon steps open, but I didn't have the energy to care about who was coming down. I never saw the man's face, but I wished I would have hid or done literally anything. I still remember the gravelly sound of his voice that day as he told me how long he had waited for this opportunity, how I was a hard woman to catch alone. He complained that I was always busy, even though my workload was well within his control. And then he got closer. I hated the way his fingers trailed my body, and how his mouth eventually found mine. It didn't matter how many times I pushed him away, he wouldn't stop. It never went further because I had managed to get out from under him and run. I slept in the forest for 3 days after that, and I tried never to be alone with any male ever again, but it didn't stop the males in my pack from trying. I wondered if it was during one of those moments that he had managed to mark me. How could he? How could he have taken away my choice? My stomach sunk. I was not what the Alpha King wanted anymore. I was ruined. He wouldn't want me anymore. I tried to take a steadying breath, but it came out shaky. There was no point in telling the Alpha what I sort of remembered. I knew it was my fault that I had not been strong enough to fight him. The anger on Alpha King Reese's face was palpable. Oh God, what if he sent me back to them? Would I even survive going back to that place? Just kill me now if that's the case. I can't go back. I will be looking further into this matter, Grace, he said, his voice scary dark. I couldn't help it, my body started shaking. I knew it was all too good to be true. He was going to send me back when he figured out exactly who it is I belonged to, because it wasn't him. He looked at me for the first time since dropping all of this information, and his face softened just a little. No matter what I find out, Grace, he leaned over me, lifting my chin so my eyes met his. You will not be going back there. I will not allow them to harm another hair on your head. I know that all that has happened to you is not your fault. I breathed a sigh of relief and nodded against his hand. I could feel my body connect with my head again, and I realized how much pain I was in. Now that you are awake and aware of what's going on, let's go back to your room. Can you walk? Despite the pain, I nodded. I could be tough, I would find a way to be useful, so he couldn't get rid of me if he finds something he doesn't like. I knew my old wounds had reopened when I stood up, and I felt the usual painful stretch of lingering injuries. I had worked through these many times before, but it usually took some time for me to block the pain from my brain. We moved slowly as I tried to gather my bearings, but it was harder than I remembered. I had had worse injuries countless times, but this time, I could barely function. This is ridiculous, Alpha King Reese said after a few minutes before I was swept off my feet and in his arms. He didn't say another word the whole way back, and when we got to my room, he sat me on the bed. As soon as I was out of his arms, he was on the phone with who I guessed was his beta and gamma. He paced the room for a few minutes before hanging up. I have matters to attend to, Grace. Get some rest, he said as soon as he hung up, and before I could even try and stop him, he was gone. I looked around from my spot on the bed. I felt really small. I didn't want to be alone at all, but who would I go to? I thought about going to find Alana, but I talked myself out of it. She probably had only hung out with me because it was her job. I let out a sob. Even in all my time in my old pack when I was completely isolated, I had never felt this alone. Another sob escaped my lips, and the tears wouldn't stop. Between the pain and the loneliness, I couldn't seem to function. I was mated to someone who wasn't the Alpha King. I had been unconscious because of it. I had pain because of it. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I was nothing. I was used. And I cried myself right into an uneasy sleep. I shifted uncomfortably in the bed. I hated how much pain my body was in. I was used to the pain, but without the constant affliction of it, it somehow felt worse than before. Perhaps it was because for once my body was actually healing, but I hated it. I knew I had done more damage somehow when I got that really bad headache, but I couldn't really remember what had happened. All I remembered was the pain. I rolled over and climbed out of bed, stretching what I could of my body as I attempted to move to the chair in the corner. I thought maybe a change of position would allow me to be a little more comfortable. I was about halfway to the chair when the door opened, and in waltzed Reese. Our eyes met across the room, and suddenly he was next to me, sweeping me off my feet and into his arms. I looked at him in surprise and saw something I didn't expect: desire. He laid me gently back on the bed, and the pain I had been feeling fell away. And before I had the chance to process anything, his hands were everywhere. The light touch of his fingertips up my sides sent chills through me. For the first time in my life, I wanted more. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice husky with something I didn't quite recognize. I gave him a small smile. With him, I was okay, and that thought scared me a little. He tenderly touched my face, and then made his way slowly down my body. He traced every visible scar, and nothing seemed to scare him the way I always thought they would scare any man. I had been told I was ugly enough times to believe nobody would want my tortured body, but this was different than I ever thought it would be. His lips found mine, and I found myself kissing him back despite my limited experience. His lips then trailed slowly down my neck, as his hands ran up and down my sides with a light touch that made me feel as though I was on fire. His hand shifted lower, surprising me a little as he slowly began to rub my clit in little circles. I gasped. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel about this. It felt so different than anything I had ever felt before, and a moan escaped my lips. Shame flooded my senses, but I also felt a strange sense of comfort and anticipation. I heard a door shut, and I sat up immediately with a gasp. No one was touching me. I was alone in my bed, but the Alpha King Reese was standing at the edge of the bed now with an unreadable expression. I pulled the blanket up as waves of embarrassment crashed through me. Shame also flashed through me as I realized it was all a dream. How could I have possibly been thinking of the Alpha King like that? Did he know? I tried to act as normal as I could, but his expression remained unreadable as took off his shoes. Did you sleep well? He asked after a long moment. I didn't mean to wake you. I nodded, forcing my expression to remain neutral, but a part of me was sure that he knew what had just happened. I grabbed my whiteboard and began to draw and write what I could in an attempt to distract myself and him from the mortifying dream he had just walked in on. I thought for a moment, before settling on a question mark and the word go, hoping he would know what I meant. He looked surprised at my initiation, but he took the chalkboard from me without hesitation. Where did I go? He asked to make sure he understood. I nodded, giving him the confirmation he needed. I went to investigate other effects of your marking. He answered simply as he climbed onto the other side of the bed. I frowned, wondering what he found. I remembered he said my pack disappeared after he had taken me away from them, and I wondered if it had anything to do with my mark that I had no idea I had. I grabbed the chalkboard back from him and began drawing out my thoughts. I knew I couldn't spell what I was trying to say, so my best bet was a series of pictures. I drew myself with an X on my neck and then some trees and some stick figures hiding among them, and a line splitting me and them. But an arrow from them crossed the line. I handed it to him nervously, and hoped he would understand what I meant. He stared at my drawing for a long moment, and I did my best not to fidget. He stared at it for so long I was sure he had no idea what I was talking about. I looked away in embarrassment before he finally spoke. You're asking if they can cross into my territory unnoticed due to your mark? And by they, you mean the person who marked and your old pack? I nodded, and he looked impressed with my line of thought. Thankfully, no. That is not a possibility at this time. I quickly added to my previous drawing a question mark and wrote the word king, before finally adding an arrow from the king to my mark. What if I mark you? He asked, looking up at me over the board, giving me an indiscernible look. I nodded hesitantly. What if he didn't want to mark me anymore? What if he didn't want me at all anymore? What would I do then? He keeps saying he won't send me back, but if I'm not a suitable bride, then I had no idea what that would mean for me. Not unless you became my official Luna would it matter. He answered, his voice softer than it had been. But I cannot mark you while you bear another's mark. It could be fatal for you, and I won't risk you. My heart fluttered at his comment. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant by that, but the way he said it had me feeling some sort of way. He was quickly becoming something safe to me, and I didn't have a clue how I was supposed to feel about it. I did know though that pride filled me, and I would do almost anything to bring that impressed look back to his face. I looked at Grace in awe. I hadn't expected her to be thinking about the effects of her mark the way I had been. I also hadn't expected her to find a way to ask her questions without being able to speak or write. I was surprised by her ability to communicate with me, and whenever she was the one to initiate the conversation, it always caused a feeling that I couldn't describe. I would love if she would just talk to me, but I would try and find ways to make communication easier for her. Maybe Alana could help teach her more words so she could read and write more effectively. If she was ever to be my Luna, she would need to know how to do those things. I laid next to her, but didn't touch her. I just soaked in her presence. I couldn't believe she was worried about how her being marked might affect my rule. She was nothing like the other woman who I had brought home before. She had a sharpness and intelligence that I hadn't expected. I lost myself in my thoughts as I laid there. Sawyer had said while she was unconscious that she had signs that she did have a wolf. That had surprised me more than anything. She didn't look like she had a wolf. She was so small and frail, but Sawyer was sure of it. He said that her wolf had definitely been bound at least once, but probably more likely had been bound twice. The idea of Grace's wolf having been bound twice made me a little nauseous, but it did sort of make sense. To be bound at all usually meant that someone was afraid of her power. Luna Kinsley had said that she was her sister, but why would Grace have those powers, and not Kinsley? Why bound one daughter and not the other? If they were afraid of her power and lineage, then it made some sense of how she was treated, why they had abused her. It didn't make it right, but it did sort of connect some of the dots. They must have feared her potential. And based on what I had seen, Luna Kinsley had everything to fear from her sister because Grace was 1,000 times better than her. Grace? She looked up at me with those big eyes of hers, and I fought my wolf not to get lost in them. He was obsessed with her gentle eyes. I will do everything I can to get to the bottom of this. I won't leave any stone unturned in my investigation. I will have. I'll uncover whatever is going on here. You don't have to worry about a thing. She blinked at me in surprise but didn't so much as show us flash a smile or respond in any way. I could see the worry in her eyes that I wasn't sure I could ease no matter what I said. Her old pack had really done a number on her, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to get her out of her head the way I wanted to. My phone started ringing, pulling us out of whatever moment we were having. This is Alpha King Reese, I answered, removing myself from the bed, despite how comfortable I had just been. The witch, Sandra, you requested has arrived at the agreed-upon diner just outside our border. Leon's deep voice came through the phone. Is the location secure? Yes, sir, Leon responded gruffly. Copy. I replied. On my way. I hung up the phone and looked at Grace, who was trying not to appear as though she was eavesdropping. I have to go, I told her as I put my shoes back on. But you keep resting, and I'll be back later. She frowned but nodded. She almost looked a little lonely, and my heart twinged at that thought, but I didn't really know how to fix it since she really didn't communicate much. As soon as I closed the bedroom door, and immediately spotted Sawyer standing at the counter in the kitchen area. Sometimes I regretted still sharing this floor with my brothers, but I was also grateful that Sawyer was always close by. You ready? He asked as he looked up from his phone and saw me approaching. Yeah. I answered, pushing my nerves away. There was no room for them in this very important meeting. I put my mask up and my feelings were gone. We walked in silence till we got to my car, but as soon as the car door closed, Sawyer started running his mouth. Are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, this is risky as hell. We have no idea if Sandra has any idea about bounding and unbounding wolves. We've used Sandra before, I pointed out. And it costs more than it was worth. Sawyer grumbled. You used an unreasonable amount of resources to find her, and you don't even know if she can help. Don't you think this is going a little overboard? Grace deserves to have her wolf free. I responded gruffly. You must really like her to go through all this trouble. I'm done with this conversation, Sawyer. I don't want to talk about Grace. Then let's talk about what this is going to cost us. You know Sandra is nuts. And for what? I don't think she will be willing to help us. The cost is irrelevant. I will pay whatever she asks. But she will not be leaving without giving us some answers. One way or the other, we will be leaving here today with the information we need. I growled. Sawyer didn't respond to that. We just let an uneasy silence fall over us as we drove and stared out the window. But I had to admit, I was having the same thoughts as him, but it didn't matter. Grace deserved to have someone try for her. So, if Sandra could help, even point us in the right direction, then I was going to do whatever it took to help Grace. And if she couldn't help, then I would find someone who could. But if anyone could, it was Sandra, so I was hoping that I was putting my money where my mouth was.